Prostitution is as old as the hills, but what is it really? Is it a profession? Do we glorify it by calling it the oldest profession? Every town and city in the world probably has prostitution. Do they want it? Do we want it? And we come to this subject at a particular moment in time. We have a little event coming up next February called the Olympics. And many people are, I think, rightfully concerned that human trafficking may increase dramatically during those 2 weeks in February. Good evening, everybody. My name is David Berner. Welcome once again to Shaw Cable TV's The Langara Dialogues. This evening, a debate about prostitution, the resolution, abolish prostitution, don't legalize it. Tonight our forum is a little different, ladies and gentlemen. Usually we have 2 debaters. Tonight we have 4 speakers, all of whom share a similar viewpoint, and they will debate with the audience. We will give our speakers a few minutes each, roughly 5 minutes each. They will make their speeches, then they will sit down, and we will invite our audience here at the library, at the Vancouver Public Library downtown, to come to the microphone. So let me introduce our speakers. Michelle Miller is the founder and director of READ, Resist Exploitation, Embrace Dignity. For more than 10 years, she has stood in solidarity and struggle with women who have been sexually exploited and trafficked into the sex industry. Michelle's work and life is rooted in the radical tradition of Jesus Christ. Jackie Lynn is a member of the Aboriginal Women's Action Network and is a prostitution researcher and abolitionist. I don't need to remind you, if you live in Vancouver, that there are an uncommon number of Aboriginal women amongst those who are called prostitutes. Annabelle Webb is the visiting social justice community scholar at the UBC Faculty of Law. She co-founded Justice for Girls in 1999. She works as an advocate fighting to end poverty, male violence, and criminalization in the lives of teenage girls. And Tricia Baptiste is the director of Honor Ministries and Consulting and is a founder member of EVE, Exploited Voices Now Educating, a group of former sex industry women who challenge the idea of sex as work. We will begin with our first speaker on the subject of abolish prostitution, don't legalize it, with Michelle Miller.
Thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on unceded Native territory and thank the Coast Salish people for allowing us to meet on their land. Tonight is a night for speaking clearly, a time for clear speech. We want to name that some words hide the truth rather than reveal stark reality. Just as torture is called enhanced interrogation, and logging of old-growth forests is called healthy forest initiatives, so predators are called sex consumers, as if they're simply purchasing stereo equipment or a new set of golf clubs. What they're doing is renting out a vagina and doing immeasurable psychological harm to women in the process. It is not a transaction, but an act of paid rape. Driven by the unchecked male demand for sexual access to women's bodies, the sex industry operates as a market for which a supply must be provided. Those being sold as consumer objects to men are women bearing the scars of colonization, poor women suffering under a globalized economy that has abandoned them, and women and girls who have already suffered sexual assault. The emotional consequences of prostitution are the same in widely varying cultures. Whether it's high track or low track, in a brothel or on the street, women in prostitution are seen as body parts or fake girlfriends, and their feelings don't matter. Most often they're not seen as human, which is perhaps why they're murdered at a higher rate than any group of women ever studied. Melissa Farley has studied prostitution for 15 years, interviewed 900 women, men, and transgendered people in prostitution in 9 countries on 5 continents. 2/3 of them had post-traumatic stress disorder on the level with combat vets, women who had just been raped, and also state-sponsored torture survivors. The average age of recruitment into prostitution is 14. 92% said they wanted out of prostitution. Prostitution is violence against women driven by the male demand for sexual access to the bodies of women and children. And most of us are painfully aware that the 2010 Olympics are right around the corner, 240 days to be exact. As reinforced by the Trafficking in Persons report released on Monday, we know that Vancouver is already a hotspot for sex tourism and trafficking. Clear speech. This is a problem that already exists in Vancouver. Demand is already an issue that we've been protesting and interfering with. Add 1 million visitors to the mix, is demand gonna rise? You answer the question. In 2004, when the Summer Olympics were held in Athens, Greek police found double the number of trafficking victims. The following year, once the games were over, the number dropped 24%. Prior to the World Cup in Germany, pimps were attempting to recruit schoolgirls from the schools in Brazil for all expense-paid trips to allegedly cheer for their team. Pasha, Europe's biggest brothel, reported, "We were working at 100% capacity, and we could have done more if we had the space." In Berlin, it's reported that Johns were queuing up to get into brothels, euphemistically called joy houses. There are 400 such joy houses in Berlin. As if we needed more evidence, let's look at the Super Bowl. Sex industry operators in Tampa tout that the city has 43 strip clubs, one for each Super Bowl. One reporter wrote that the week of Super Bowl 43 is to Tampa's naughty nightlife, more sanitized language, what Black Friday is to America's shopping malls. The general manager of the 2001 Odyssey Strip Club bragged, "Based on what we did last Super Bowl, the numbers will quadruple during this weekend." And we don't know what the numbers will be for the Winter Games, but we do know that demand is already a crucial issue that we've been fighting in Vancouver. Let me speak clearly. It is a time for clear speech. We have abandoned our most vulnerable women to predatory male demand for paid sex. Last Friday, I was hanging out with a friend who is in the process of exiting prostitution, and we were discussing legalization in the current political climate here. And she said to me, "Michelle, legalization would be like placing me on a silver platter and serving it over to death." It's time to make visible the real criminal and decriminalize the sold. This model of law has had great success in Sweden, and it can improve the lives of women in Canada. Remove the laws that penalize those who are selling sex, the sold, and criminalize the buyer. We already have a problem with male demand for sexual access to the bodies of women and children, and it will increase with the games, just as it does with conventions or any time you have men traveling away from their social networks and enjoying a degree of anonymity. So what will we say to our Olympic visitors? Will we say, "Come on in, our women are for sale"? Or will we stand up against the male demand that fuels human trafficking and say, buying sex is not a sport? Thank you.